She's nobody. Just an embarrassment we have to put up with. My dad laughed, gesturing toward me with a smug grin. We were standing in the middle of my family's crowded living room. Everyone chuckled politely, my sister beaming with pride as she stood beside her new fiancé, a highly decorated Navy SEAL commander. They all thought I was the black sheep, a failure who vanished years ago and achieved nothing. But as my dad finished his cruel joke, the room froze. The Navy SEAL didn't laugh. His eyes locked onto mine, his face draining of all color. He didn't offer a casual handshake. Instead, he snapped his boots together, stood perfectly straight, raised his right hand to his brow, and delivered a crisp, unyielding salute. "Admiral, ma'am," he said, his voice echoing through the sudden, suffocating silence. Everyone went pale. Follow my story until the end to see how the nobody became their biggest shock. My name is Clara, and at 32 years old, I've learned that the people who know you the least are often the ones most confident in defining your worth. I grew up in a house where everything was measured by appearance and status. My father, a man who built his reputation on social climbing, viewed me as a disappointment from the moment I could speak. To him, I was the quiet one, the one who didn't fit the mold of his golden child. My younger sister, Vanessa. While Vanessa was pampered, celebrated, and groomed for a life of luxury, I was consistently pushed into the shadows, labeled the family's little problem. I watched for years as my voice was drowned out by their constant, shallow chatter about appearances and connections. Eventually, I realized that I couldn't grow in an environment designed to keep me small. So, a decade ago, I walked away. I cut every tie, left my bags, and vanished without a backward glance. I knew they assumed I had failed, that I had been swallowed up by the world they told me I couldn't survive in. They spent years whispering that I was nothing, a directionless soul who probably ended up working jobs they would turn their noses up at. Little did they know, I wasn't running away from the world. I was running toward a future they couldn't even fathom. They clung to their outdated, narrow picture of me, completely unaware that while they were busy playing status games, I was busy building a life defined by discipline, purpose, and a reality far beyond their petty, superficial reach. For 10 long years, the silence from my family was the greatest gift I could have asked for. That was until a sudden, crisp envelope arrived at my private address. It was a formal, heavily stylized invitation from Vanessa, demanding my presence at an exclusive, upscale family dinner. Appended to it was a manipulative text message from her, practically begging me to show up just so she could showcase her latest and greatest achievement. Vanessa was celebrating her engagement, and she hadn't just found anyone. She was marrying Marcus, a legendary Navy SEAL commander whose name carried immense weight in elite military circles. The tone of her message made it glaringly obvious what they expected. They pictured me showing up down on my luck, dressed in rags and desperate for a free meal, providing the perfect, dismal backdrop to make Vanessa's new, shimmering elite status look even more magnificent. My father and sister wanted an audience to witness their ultimate social victory, and they desperately needed the family failure to be there to validate their superiority. They expected me to shrink in envy at the sight of a man like Marcus. I stared at the invitation, a slow, deliberate smile spreading across my face as I realized exactly what kind of trap they were trying to set for me. They wanted a show, and they genuinely believed I would play the victim. They had no idea that by inviting me into their carefully constructed arena, they were setting the stage for their own absolute ruin. The evening of the grand dinner finally arrived, and I chose to dress in a simple, completely unassuming outfit, keeping a low profile. I wanted them to see exactly what they expected to see. When I walked through the heavy doors of my family's home, the atmosphere was thick with absolute arrogance. My father didn't even greet me with a hug. Instead, he immediately began dropping patronizing comments about my apparent lack of ambition and how my plain appearance perfectly reflected my stagnant life. Vanessa stood nearby, practically glowing with smug satisfaction, deliberately tilting her hand so the bright light would catch her massive, expensive engagement ring. "It's a shame you never found a steady path in life, Clara," she sighed heavily, her voice dripping with synthetic pity. I quietly stayed silent, offering nothing but a polite nod, letting them dig their own graves deeper with every passing second. They proudly paraded me around the room like a tragic prop, showing me off to their wealthy guests as the ultimate cautionary tale of the family. My father stood near the center of the crowd, grinning from ear to ear, completely convinced he held all the power and control. He was fully ready to use me as a humiliating punchline to elevate Vanessa's status before his elite guests. I stood perfectly still, watching him prepare his cruel speech, letting the heavy tension in the entire room build to an absolute peak. I knew that their fragile, superficial world would shatter. The grand double doors opened and Marcus finally arrived, looking imposing in his crisp, immaculate, full-dress uniform. The entire room seemed to shift as guests turned to admire his medals and commanding presence. My father's eyes lit up with predatory ambition, and he eagerly grabbed Marcus by the arm, dragging him straight over to where I was standing. He couldn't resist the opportunity to deliver one last crushing blow to my dignity in front of his new, prized connection. With a theatrical flourish and a loud, mocking voice that cut through the chatter of the room, my father gave a smug grin and announced, "It's embarrassing, but I still have to introduce her. She's nobody. Just a disappointment we have to put up with." The surrounding guests chuckled politely, and Vanessa beamed with absolute pride, waiting for me to wither in shame under the gaze of a legendary military hero. But as the echoes of my father's cruel joke died down, the expected laughter didn't follow from the man who actually mattered. I looked Marcus dead in the eye, maintaining a calm, unblinking gaze. The moment his eyes locked onto mine, the smug look vanished from his face, and his skin turned a stark pale gray. The casual grin he had been wearing completely froze, replaced by an expression of pure shock and sudden, intense recognition. The air left the room as he realized exactly who was standing right in front of him. Marcus snapped his boots together, his heels clicking loudly against the hardwood floor. In an instant, his posture went completely rigid. He raised his right hand to his brow, delivering a crisp, unyielding salute that shook the entire room. "Admiral, ma'am," he declared, his booming voice echoing through the sudden, suffocating silence. The guests froze, their drinks hovering midair. My father's smug grin vanished, his jaw dropping so low it looked comical. Vanessa blinked rapidly, looking between her fiancé and me in complete bewilderment. "Marcus, darling, what are you doing?" She giggled nervously, reaching out to touch his arm. "You don't need to play jokes on her. I told you. She's just my sister. She's nobody." Marcus didn't lower his hand. His eyes remained locked onto mine, filled with intense, unwavering respect. "Silence, Vanessa," he barked, his sharp tone cutting through her fake laughter like a knife. He turned his head slightly toward my father, his voice dripping with absolute steel. "You have no idea who you are talking to. This woman is Rear Admiral Clara Whitaker. She doesn't just outrank me, she is the operational commander of my entire strike group. She is the youngest admiral in the history of our branch, and every deployment I make goes directly through her desk for final approval." The collective gasp from the crowd was audible, the color completely drained from my father's face, turning him a sickly shade of white. Vanessa staggered back a step, clutching her chest as if she had been hit by a physical blow. The absolute nobody they had spent a decade mocking was actually the supreme authority standing over the man they worshipped. The room felt completely frozen as the power dynamic flipped entirely. My father tried to awkwardly laugh it off, clearing his throat and stepping forward with an incredibly forced smile. "Well, Admiral, look at that. I always knew you had greatness in you, Clara. I was just joking earlier. You know how it is. I'm proud to take credit for raising such an elite officer." Marcus turned his head slowly, staring at my father with absolute disgust. "Take credit?" Marcus echoed, his voice echoing through the silence. "You just humiliated a superior officer in front of a crowd. You called her a disappointment. That doesn't show pride, it shows a complete lack of integrity and character." He looked down at Vanessa, who was trembling, her hands shaking as she tried to find words to repair the damage. "Marcus, please, it's just family drama," she stammered, tears welling up in her eyes. "You don't understand our relationship." "I understand exactly what I'm seeing," Marcus replied coldly. "I am a Navy SEAL commander. I lead men into battle based on trust, respect, and honor. If this is how you treat your own blood when you think nobody is watching, then I have seriously misjudged your character, Vanessa. I cannot marry into a family that builds itself up by tearing others down." Vanessa let out a sharp sob, clutching her expensive engagement ring as the realization set in that her elite status was crumbling into pieces right before her eyes. My father stood there, completely paralyzed, unable to look me or Marcus in the eye. The shallow foundation of their lives had just collapsed. I calmly adjusted the lapel of my jacket, looking at the chaotic ruins of my family's pride one last time. I didn't need to yell, and I didn't need to gloat. True success never needs to bark for attention. Its mere presence speaks volumes. I looked at Marcus, giving him a brief, approving nod. "Carry on, Commander," I said softly, before turning on my heel and walking out of the front door into the cool evening air. Behind me, the frantic voices of my father and sister faded into insignificance. They were left scrambling in the wreckage of their own superficial lives, trapped in a nightmare of their own making. For 10 years, they chose to believe I was nothing, simply because my path didn't align with their petty metrics of vanity. They never bothered to find out who I actually was, and in the end, their own ignorance became their ultimate downfall. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Would you have revealed your true identity sooner, or would you have let them play their games until the trap snapped shut? Comment the city you're watching from down below so I can see how far my story has reached. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until the very end.